Merci, Monsieur le Président. Before I begin, I want to just acknowledge that we're once again assembled on the unceded territory of the Wolastoqey people, and that within the boundaries of New Brunswick also there is the unceded territory of the Passamaquoddy and Mi'kmaq peoples. Jusqu'ici, aucun gouvernement n'a encore établi de relations concrètes avec les Premières Nations du Nouveau-Brunswick pour reconnaître que nous sommes les consignataires de traités de paix et d'amitié, ce qui, jusqu'à ce jour, sert de fondement juridique de notre relation en tant que peuple. So, Mr. Speaker, what is the basis of a meaningful relationship? It begins with acknowledging the truths of the past and the present. This includes the efforts of successive governments through history to assimilate Indigenous peoples, beginning with the establishment of the Sussex Indian School in 1787 in Sussex, New Brunswick, one of the first residential schools to be established in British North America, long before Confederation. Residential schools at that time were also established in Meductic and Majorville. Exploitation began quickly. Children were used as free labor on nearby farms or as indentured slaves and servants in the households of local Sussex area families. Many were sexually abused. Leading loyalists such as Jonathan Odell and Ward Chipman sat on the Board of Management. Following revelations about these goings-on, the school was closed in 1826 after nearly 40 years of operation. The truth is difficult to hear sometimes, Mr. Speaker, but if we're going to move down the road to reconciliation, it's important that the truth be shared and widely understood. Compte tenu de l'histoire, le Nouveau-Brunswick aurait d'être la première province à lancer une invitation à passer à l'action à la Commission de vérité et de réconciliation, mais en 4 ans, le gouvernement dirigé par Brian Gallant ne l'a pas fait. C'est maintenant seulement qu'on voit dans le discours de Trône un engagement en ce sens pris par le Parti vert dans ce programme électoral. Just as we cannot move forward toward reconciliation, Mr. Speaker, without telling truths, we cannot pursue reconciliation without seeking justice. Among other things, this means redressing Aboriginal title to lands in the province, the management of forest resources, and upholding our obligations as signatories to the peace and friendship treaties. Though some New Brunswickers may not see the pursuit of truth, justice, and reconciliation with Indigenous peoples in our province as their top priority, young New Brunswickers do. And as members of this Legislative Assembly, we have the responsibility to make this our priority, given our legal obligations to uphold our treaties and to protect and advance Indigenous and treaty rights enshrined in the Constitution of Canada. And Mr. Speaker, I say our treaties because of course we are co-signatories to the peace and friendship treaties. The treaties don't belong to one side or the other, they belong to all of us. So we in fact are all treaty people. Mr. Speaker, on September the 24th, I received a resounding vote of confidence from the people of Fredericton South in returning me to the Legislative Assembly to represent them. It's humbling, and I want to thank the people of Fredericton South for putting their trust in me to work on their behalf in our provincial parliament. I want to thank the many young men and women who also voted for the first time in their lives, who put their faith in me, and thank their parents and grandparents, who voted for the change to which I and my colleagues are committed to make on behalf of their children and grandchildren. I want to recognize the new citizens of our country who also voted for the first time, Mr. Speaker, trusting their vote to me to ensure that they and their families can fully participate in New Brunswick society, free from discrimination, prejudice, and sharing the same sense of security as everyone else, regardless of their country of origin, religion, or race. Mr. Speaker, there is pervasive anxiety about our future in our province, some of it well-placed and some of it misplaced. But the end result is too much fear, Mr. Speaker. That fear threatens to divide us, isolating us from one another. It's one of the reasons my caucus drafted the Declaration of Intent to cooperate for MLAs to endorse, based on the fundamental principles that underpin our society here in New Brunswick, and they include la reconnaissance et l'affirmation des droits ancestraux et droits issus des traités des peuples autochtones de Nouveau-Brunswick, puis l'égalité raciale des communautés linguistiques anglophones et francophones, y compris le droit d'être servi en anglais ou en français par le gouvernement et le droit et des institutions d'enseignement et culturel distinctes, le droit à un environnement sain et sécuritaire, le respect de l'autonomie et l'autorité de l'Assemblée législative pour assurer une gouvernance bonne et responsable. 46 of 49 MLAs agreed to cooperate and collaborate in this chamber based on these principles, Mr. Speaker. Once someone has finally gained the confidence of this House, we must begin the hard work of creating this collaborative environment so we can advance these principles through legislation and through changes to our House rules. Mr. Speaker, in my very first response to a speech from the throne 4 years ago, I touched on some of these same themes, and I'm afraid things have not progressed. At the time, I read a quote sometimes attributed to Plato, and it goes like this: "We can easily forgive a child who is afraid of the dark. The real tragedy of life is when men, and women of course, are afraid of the light." Mr. Speaker, as members of this legislature, as parliamentarians, we must resist the fear of remaining silent for fear of being disliked or losing votes when people's rights are threatened. We have the responsibility to stand for justice, to protect and advance the rights of minorities, to uphold the charter rights of Acadians and other Francophone New Brunswickers and the Aboriginal treaty rights of First Nations enshrined in Canada's Constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, that means refusing to give in to the temptation of following a crowd, like those who would undermine the right to receive emergency health care in either official language, blaming the unequal access to ambulance services in rural communities on the Official Languages Act rather than on the mismanagement of our ambulance system by the private management company Medavie and the Department of Health. Because, Mr. Speaker, that's where it begins, giving over management of critical public health services to a private company who are looking to cut costs, minimize expenditures, maximize their revenue, and that means services suffer. And that means, Mr. Speaker, our ambulance system has been set up in such a way that it has serious shortcomings, that it has significant gaps, and those need to be addressed. And we can and must and will address them. Because, Mr. Speaker, there is nothing wrong with New Brunswick that we can't fix with what's right about our province. And that means, Mr. Speaker, appealing to people's better nature, not playing on their fears. Nous avons du pain sur la planche, oui, beaucoup de travail à faire, mais pour réellement progresser, nous allons devoir travailler ensemble. Et cela veut dire respecter nos différences et les mesures que nous avons mises en place pour protéger les minorités. We are, Mr. Speaker, in a time of rapid climate change, whose consequences have been felt in New Brunswick for more than a decade now, from the spread of Lyme disease with debilitating results for more and more New Brunswickers, to the all too routine and heartbreaking damage to homes and businesses from flooding, to the anxiety our children feel about their future. 2.5 weeks ago, the world's leading climate scientists released the IPCC report, which warned there is only a dozen years remaining for us to make the dramatic changes necessary to reduce our fossil fuel production and consumption, to limit the impacts of droughts, floods, extreme heat, and poverty for hundreds of millions of people in the developing world. Le temps presse pour agir. Et Deborah Robert, la présidente du groupe de travail sur les impacts du changement climatique, a dit « La communauté scientifique tire très fort sur la sonnette d'alarme. J'espère qu'elle va réussir à réveiller les gens et à leur faire comprendre que le temps de l'essai est fini. C'est regrettable, mais je n'ai pas détecté de sentiment d'urgence dans le discours de Trône. This throne speech appears hastily thrown together, making contradictory commitments For example, to implement the Select Committee's recommendations for climate action, which included putting a price on carbon pollution, as well as implementing the diluted recommendations in the Liberals' climate plan that followed. Mr. Speaker, these two things differ in a number of important areas, yet the throne speech recommends implementing both of them. So I don't know how you square that circle, but I would recommend implementing the Select Committee with its recommendations, with its stronger all-party recommendations as our plan. Reducing overall energy demand through improved energy efficiency and substituting renewable forms of energy for fossil fuels are two of the key elements of climate action, Mr. Speaker. Yet the throne speech contains vague commitments to increase funding for energy efficiency measures for homes and businesses and to expand the use of renewable energy. Well, who doesn't support that, Mr. Speaker? Who doesn't support increased energy efficiency and expanding the use of renewable energy? But the throne speech contains no firm targets, as were contained in our platform, no timelines, as was contained in our platform, and no legislative mechanisms, as was contained in our platform. And in fact, as was contained in a number of private members' bills I introduced during the 58th sitting of the Legislative Assembly. This typifies the problem with this particular throne speech throughout, Mr. Speaker. It contains broad statements of intent that are rarely backed up by commitments to act. Les intentions sont bonnes, mais l'action manque. Il y a 2 ans, le Premier ministre et le cabinet ont lancé avec tambour et trompette le plan d'action sur le changement climatique, mais l'effort s'arrête là et n'a pas été mis en route. Past throne speeches made commitments to increase energy efficiency, but there are no targets and no timetables. In fact, this government used its majority to pass legislation to eliminate New Brunswick's award-winning Energy Conservation and Efficiency Agency, and later voted down my bill to establish an agency to replace it. There are thousands of jobs, Mr. Speaker, in fighting climate change, particularly for our tradespeople, that can be rapidly created in the energy efficiency sector in New Brunswick by upgrading our housing and commercial building stock. But it requires that we have an effective delivery mechanism and that we set targets to achieve these things. This throne speech provides neither. A 2014 study by CanMac Economics, a consulting firm based in Nova Scotia, found that investment in energy efficiency in Nova Scotia to that date in building the local industry that would grow at more than 5 times the rate of the provincial economy over 5 years, and that by 2014 it had already created 1,200 full-time jobs for that province, Mr. Speaker. So the potential is huge. This growing sector in the green economy creates far more employment per dollar than any other sector of the energy economy, Mr. Speaker, whether it's shale gas development, traditional oil and gas development, or any other energy development you might think of. It ignites new business startups, creates new products and technologies, utilizes the innovative developments and inventions and processes developed at our universities, like the University of New Brunswick's engineering faculty. It cuts costs for homes and business owners and shrinks their carbon footprint. In a word, energy efficiency is an engine of growth in a green economy. Mr. Speaker, we're missing the boat. Past throne speeches also committed to expanding the use of renewable energy, but this didn't happen. The Liberals never reinstated the renewable energy branch at our Department of Energy that the Tories had previously eliminated. It's needed to provide the institutional means to expand renewable energy, and without it, that's just not going to happen. Nor did they increase the legislated target for renewable power that NB Power must meet under the Electricity Act, which was set by former Premier Bernard Lord more than a dozen years ago and hasn't fundamentally changed since. Le discours de Trône contenait bien un engagement à utiliser davantage les énergies non polluantes, le nombre de codes pour l'énergie nucléaire, qui est le moyen le plus coûteux et le plus dangereux qu'on puisse imaginer pour produire de l'électricité. Et n'oublions pas que le nucléaire est justement la source de la dette massive qui écrase l'énergie Nouveau-Brunswick. Pas de changement ici non plus. When I read the throne speech, Mr. Speaker, I see no change when it comes to social development. Since being elected, this government has been telling seniors they were going to take action to help them stay in their home. This didn't happen. This throne speech makes the commitment again to further advance the Home First program to help seniors live independently. But it has advanced little since the Tories designed it toward the end of the Alward government. Once again, we have good intent, which lacks a concrete plan of action and is betrayed by 4 years of inaction. Mr. Speaker, our high rates of poverty extract a terrible human cost on adults and children in our province and impose huge financial costs on the province's books. Yet the throne speech makes no substantive commitment to eliminate poverty, other than raise the minimum wage by 75 cents per hour next year. There was, in our platform, considerable commitments around attacking poverty and reducing poverty, Mr. Speaker, from which the government could have chosen to include in their throne speech, and they didn't. Income assistance rates remain well below what is required to meet the basic requirements of life, Mr. Speaker, and we also proposed pilot projects to establish and institute in New Brunswick a basic income guarantee that could be rolled out, if successful, across the province, just like Saskatchewan rolled out Medicare, and just like Saskatchewan managed to influence the life of all Canadians when Lester Pearson and his minority government adopted Medicare for all Canadians. One could imagine a basic income guarantee being adopted by the Prime Minister of the day in Canada for all Canadians if we could prove its worth in our province of New Brunswick. Parlant d'inaction au sujet de la pauvreté, les mamans qui vivent de l'assistance sociale se font même s'assir leur pension alimentaire pour leurs enfants par le gouvernement. Et comme si ce n'était pas assez, des règles empêchent les gens de partager un logement pour tenter d'attirer un peu leur maigre revenu. The Economic and Social Inclusion Corporation's recommendations to try and establish a usable public transportation system in New Brunswick to help people who can't otherwise afford to get to work, to travel to work, to help people who can't afford to get to medical appointments, to get to medical appointments, are altogether absent from this throne speech. When it comes to health care commitments, Mr. Speaker, in this throne speech, once again, there are good intentions, which again lack a concrete plan of action and are betrayed by 4 years of inaction. The throne speech commits to expand the role of nurse practitioners, midwives, and other practitioners to improve access to health care. Yet over the past 4 years, we saw nurse practitioners leaving the province, Mr. Speaker, because they couldn't get sufficient hours to keep their licenses. It's shameful. Shameful. And most recently, the obstetrics unit at the Upper River Valley Hospital was closed, forcing expectant moms to go to Edmonton or Fredericton. Midwives have been hired to practice in Fredericton only and nowhere else in the province. And perhaps if midwives had been hired in the Upper River Valley, this would not have happened, and those moms would have had service in their own communities. In the throne speech, there is no commitment whatsoever to end the private management of our extramural health services, nor our emergency health services provided by our paramedics. There is no backing away from the determination to replace community-based nonprofit nursing homes with for-profit corporate ones. The staff of the Chief Medical Officer of Health remains cast to the four winds within government. There is no commitment to make the Medical Officer of Health's office whole again. So, Mr. Speaker, I ask, where is the change New Brunswickers voted for in this throne speech? When I look at the commitments to job creation and economic development, I again don't see much change. In our platform, we put forward a bold proposal to increase local production of goods and services in our communities across this province to simply replace 10% of the goods and services we import. We would use government procurement to prime that pump and repurpose loan guarantees and payroll rebates currently provided to large profitable corporations for local enterprises to participate fully in delivering that import substitution strategy. And Mr. Speaker, simply, according to the research done at the University of Moncton and elsewhere, simply replacing 10% of our imports by an increase in the local production of goods and services employing local New Brunswickers in our local communities would keep profits local, generate community wealth, and create 14,000 jobs, injecting $1.8 billion into our economy annually. There was barely a nod in this direction, Mr. Speaker, in the throne speech, save one element that was cherry-picked regarding increasing the production of local food to reduce the imports of food to our province. It's obviously, Mr. Speaker, something we support, but it should be part of a bold new approach to local economic development, which we can debate and discuss on this floor of the Legislative Assembly to turn into real meaningful legislative action. The throne speech suggests that the government would largely stay the course on economic development, focused on large, export-oriented multinational corporations. So again, Mr. Speaker, where is the change people voted for that would support significantly local enterprises in our cities, in our towns, in our villages, and in our rural communities? In its very first throne speech in 2014, this government committed to re-examine the unsustainable forestry plan designed to deliver 25% more timber to J.D. Irving that was committed by the Tories in a 25-year contract signed with that company on April the 7th, 2014. The review was supposed to ensure that the resulting forest management plan was sustainable and fair. This was never done, Mr. Speaker. Why? Well, the contractual obligations are such, in fact, that it's impossible to design a fair and sustainable forestry plan under that contract. In fact, Mr. Speaker, disturbingly, the wildlife biologists who designed our wildlife habitat conservation system for Crown lands, widely recognized across Canada as a leading-edge approach to ensuring we maintain viable populations of wildlife on our Crown forests. Mr. Speaker, he was relieved of his job. Why? Perhaps for fear that this respected scientist might cause some trouble given the unsustainable and unjust plan that had been adopted, just as Dr. Ailish Cleary was removed from her job. So, Mr. Speaker, in the throne speech, there is no mention of cancelling the contract with J.D. Irving or modifying the resulting forestry plan that implements this, despite its impact on the livelihoods of woodlot owners, despite its impact on rural economies, despite its impact on economic opportunities from forest resources, despite its impact on wildlife, forest biodiversity, on our rivers and streams, and on the spraying of herbicides over an increasing area of softwood plantations. Again, I ask, where is the change people voted for? There is a commitment to establish a legislative committee to consider recommending a phased-in ban of forestry herbicides based on objective evidence. Now, Mr. Speaker, that's a bit of a setup, because the decision on banning something like herbicides that contains a herbicide spraying that represents a variety of risks has to be based on the social acceptability of those risks in the end, not simply on the science. The social acceptability of those risks associated with spraying, of course, is derived from the scientific evidence. But in the end, it's the social acceptability of those risks, the weighing of those risks that New Brunswickers and we as legislators must make to determine whether or not to err on the side of caution and ban the spraying of herbicide, as I believe, or continue its use if you simply looked at the objective evidence without weighing the risks properly and making a judgment based on the acceptability of those risks to New Brunswickers, to their health, and to the well-being of our forests in this province. Just to remind the House about the key element of the contract, Mr. Speaker, before I leave this part of the speech, I will quote from the Memorandum of Agreement signed with J.D. Irving on February the 7th, 2014. The parties acknowledge and agree that Irving's commitment to invest is predicated on the certainty of increased wood supply, competitive wood costs, and reduced costs in Irving's forest operations in the province, and made in reliance on the terms set out in the agreement. that wood supply for spruce, fir, and jack pine is to be increased by 25% and guaranteed for the next 25 years. As I said, Mr. Speaker, this contract is unsustainable, unfair, and unjust, yet the Liberals have steadfastly refused to make changes. They have steadfastly supported this deal that was imposed on us 4 years ago. Where's the change, Mr. Speaker, that New Brunswickers voted for? Well, there is much in the shopping list of intentions, Mr. Speaker, in this throne speech that should be pursued, indeed. The inaction over the past 4 years, despite many fine pronouncements of good intention, doesn't instill in me much confidence that action will be forthcoming from this throne speech. It is bereft of a vision, and it's not up to the task of delivering the change New Brunswickers are looking for. That will have to wait for when MLAs get down to work. It is my hope that the collaboration New Brunswickers are looking for will emerge in this Legislative Assembly, not only out of the necessity given the minority government situation, but out of a common and shared wish to deliver the change New Brunswickers voted for and are expecting from this Legislative Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.